Good afternoon. Sorry, just came running from another side of the campus. So today we'll begin partly dealing with Sylviane Diouf's book. But before embarking on Sylviane Diouf, we need to think of the idea of discovery. You know, when we ask the question, who discovered America? Right? Who discovered America? Huh? So Columbus discovered America? America was not discovered by anybody. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so Native Americans from Asia 3,000 years ago. Any other idea? Who discovered America? I did. I'm still discovering America, right? But who discovered America? And why this question is important and in certain neighborhoods is problematic, and in some areas it might get you arrested. Right? So who discovered America? Now, can't we think of it from the other perspective, that the Native Americans discovered Columbus? Why is it that the person who's coming to somebody's house to say, I discovered you, rather than the other way around, where somebody arriving and he says, Namaste, you say, no, you're in the wrong continent, dude. Meaning, Columbus was going to India. So when he arrived into this new land, and the concept of new also has to be between parentheses because it's new from the perspective of the person arriving, not from the perspective of the people who have been there, at least records of 10,000 years, if not more. Now, this concept of discovery is an important concept because a place is discovered, in particular, if Western Europeans came to that location, it becomes discovered. If it is unknown, it is still to be a place to be explored and discovered by European explorer, even up to the present period. So, in our discussion of who discovered America, it's an important, understanding of where do we locate our knowledge of America first, and second, when we speak about Muslims, including talking about Sylviane Diouf, because there's today Muslims who want to prove that they were the first to arrive into America before Columbus. That concept itself is problematic, because we're attempting to locate our discovery of America at an earlier period, even if there is theories of contact or evidence of contact. Those by themselves have to be contextualized with thinking of Native Americans' history, their experiences, their tradition, and how they either related or contacted or came into contact with a number of communities from many parts of the world. So what we want in here is once again to remove our location of thinking Columbus discovered America. We need to think of the other way, that the Native Americans discovered Columbus, and in particular they discovered he was lost. All right? So that's the first concept for us. Once we understand what it means, then we could begin to relate to other issues relative to other peoples who arrived into this country, including the slaves, as well as other individuals who arrived into this country. So what we could say is that America was not discovered. America was not discovered. There was contact that occurred, 1492, all right? And some argue that there were earlier contacts that took place. So, and these are theories of pre-Columbus contacts. And the different groups that have theories of contacts extend from European themselves, of the Vikings, in Newfoundland, that there are evidence or archaeological evidence to say that there were Vikings who crossed and made it into Newfoundland and developed some type of settlement. There are also theories of contact from Polynesia of individuals crossing on boats and making it to various parts of South America as well as Hawaii and other islands. And there are also some who argue that there were reverse contact taking place from areas of America, South, Central, and possibly North America, and parts of Asia. So that's another theory of contact. Others actually argue that there were points of contact from earlier ancient civilization, and in particular those who tried to argue that the Egyptians have made it across with some of their rudimentary boats. Once again, this is a theory of contacts, and as such assert, in particular in relations to the pyramids in parts of the Americas, that these pyramids have possibly distinctive influence of Egyptians. Once again, these are theories, right, that people argue and put forth. Others argue that some from West Africa and North Africa have made it across the Atlantic and possibly landed on the shores of America and possibly some of the islands in the Caribbean. And evidences are put forth, whether it's distinctive archaeological finds, some possibly statues that resemble Africans or African type of facial features. These, once again, are argued that there was some contact that took place in pre-Columbus period. What we could say for sure that all these are theories of contact, and the evidence is still out there for people to find out whether human beings from other parts of the world were able to arrive or reach or have relations with the indigenous communities in here. Any of these evidence should not be thought that they're the ones who brought civilization to the uncivilized, and the uncivilized between quotation marks. Because once again, even if we think about context, there is this underlying argument that how did they do this? They must have had somebody come and teach them. And if somebody taught them in the past, then we right now need to teach them again. So it's in essence, theoretically, gives the legitimacy for the white man burden of bringing the heathens into civilization. Not that the white man have always been the burden. All right? So in this sense, this aspect of trying to find the evidence of earlier contact with the understanding that the whatever development that we find in this new world, quote unquote, must have come from outside. And as such, the indigenous communities did not have the human ingenuity to actually develop their own methods and ways and civilization. If it happened in China, or it happened in Europe, or in Africa, or any other place, why could it happen here without the need of diffusion from outside? So this theory of outside, even if we find proof to it, we have to place it in its right location, and not to use it, once again, as a way to affirm that there was some civilizational mission that came upon from a distant place that rationalized historical arrival as such to rationalize 1492 and post-1492. And therefore, if we understand 1492 as a civilizational project, then everything that happens thereafter must be defended, because obviously look at the development that we have seen, right, in this continent as well as Central and Latin America. So this gets us into thinking about the arrival of Muslim slaves into this new territory, and always putting new between two parentheses. And in here we have to distinguish between voluntary immigrants versus involuntary immigrants. Right? And once we later on discuss some aspects of the impact of voluntary versus involuntary, we have to understand what consequences that arises from involuntary immigrants. Right? Native Americans are the indigenous community in here. Every one of us that is not indigenous Native Americans are a new arrival with a new green card. Some of us had their green card earlier than others, but every one of us is a green card holder from one generation or the other. But in this, we have to distinguish between voluntary and involuntary. The African American community in particular should be placed under the category of involuntary immigrants. And to say the category of immigrants is problematic because they were not consulted to begin with, so essentially they're involuntary in bondage. And there's consequences of being in that category because their ability to be in this land or be a fully functioning community was truncated from the onset. Right? And we will get into this aspect of the African American experience beginning with the slave period. Now, Sylviana Diouf says that there are between 10 to 20% of all the slaves that were brought to the New World were of Muslim background. A low of 10% to a high of 20% of all the slaves that were brought to the New World were of Muslim backgrounds. And the reason she makes that point is thinking of the diffusion of Islam in West Africa. The diffusion of Islam in West Africa. And to locate Islam in West Africa as well as in Africa in general, we need some historical progression. The first community of Muslims in the world that had autonomy is a community that was established in Africa, in Ethiopia. All right, so around the year 614, of the Common Era, the Prophet Muhammad, the founder and the source of the new religion Islam, gave permission to his followers to migrate out of Mecca. So in Mecca they were persecuted. They were not allowed to practice their religion. Many of them were slaves that converted to the new religion that he was preaching. Some of his relatives, the Prophet, likewise were under the pressure. And therefore he authorized a number of his followers to seek refuge in Ethiopia. And at that time, the rule in Ethiopia was a kingdom, and the king gave political asylum. In the modern language, will be political asylum to these individuals, allowing them to develop their community in Ethiopia to practice their religion freely, even though that Ethiopia at the time was a Christian kingdom. All right, so that's also, you know, in our contemporary football game, we think Muslims and Christians are always fighting. All right, and we think that religion is a Super Bowl. All right, either you're part of the Niners nation or the Raiders nation. All right. So in here at 614, the first autonomous practicing community of Muslims outside of the Arabian Peninsula was founded in Africa. Now this is also important because another aspect that we always have to be aware of